It's
She
gonna
had
be
not
okay.
cried in
We're
23
getting out.
years.
I'll be
Not when
scared.
she talked a teenager off the 7th Avenue Bridge at 2 in the morning, his voice so young it could have belonged to her own son. Not when she stayed on the line with a woman who bled out in a parking garage, listening to the breathing slow, and then stopped the silence afterward, louder than any scream. Not when she guided a father through CPR on his infant daughter, counting compressions into the phone, while the sirens wailed closer and closer, but never close enough. 23 years of other people's worst moments, and Ramona Cross had not shed a single tear. Her colleagues at the Phoenix Emergency Communications Center had a name for her. They called her the Wall. Not to her face, of course. Never to her face. But she knew. She had heard it whispered in the break room, muttered over coffee, passed between new dispatchers like a warning. Watch out for Ramona. She does not bend. She does not break. She does not feel. They were wrong about that last part. She felt everything. Every call, every voice, every desperate plea that came through her headset in the small hours of the morning when the city slept and the darkness brought out the things people tried to hide during the day. She felt all of it. She simply refused to let it show, because showing it meant admitting something she had spent 23 years trying to outrun. But tonight, in the dead space between 3 and 4 in the morning, a homeless boy would whisper 3 words through a dying phone from somewhere beneath the city, and something inside Ramona Cross would shatter like glass that had been held together by nothing but habit. Those 3 words and the chaos that followed would bring down a politician, unite enemies who had never spoken a civil word to each other, and prove that sometimes the people society throws away are the only ones worth believing in. The crying stopped. One moment it was there, thin and desperate, threading up through the rusted storm grate like smoke from a fire burning somewhere far below. The next silence. Complete. Absolute. The kind of silence that makes you question whether you heard anything at all, whether your mind was playing tricks in the gray space between sleep and waking. Cody Wren pressed his face against the metal bars and held his breath. 3:17 in the morning, August in Phoenix. The desert cold that nobody warned you about, the cold that arrives like a thief after the sun goes down, and the concrete releases the last of its stored heat, and there is nothing left but the dry chill of a landscape that was never meant to be lived on. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and settles there like it belongs. He was 11 years old. He had been sleeping under the 19th Avenue overpass for 6 weeks. Before that, the drainage culvert near Encanto Park, where the concrete was smooth enough to lie on, and the overhang kept the rain off most nights. Before that, a storage alcove behind a strip mall on Camelback Road. Before that, a dozen other places that blurred together in his memory like watercolors left in the rain, each one a little worse than the last, each one a little farther from anything that resembled a life. 2 years on the streets, 730 days of learning the rules that kept you alive. Which dumpsters behind which restaurants had food that would not make you sick? Which overpasses were claimed by people who would hurt you for the space? Which intersections had drivers who might hand you $1 through a cracked window, and which ones had drivers who would spit instead? 2 years had taught Cody Wren the most important rule of all. Do not get involved. Do not draw attention. Do not be the person who sticks their neck out for strangers, because strangers will not stick their necks out for you. The world is a machine built to grind down the people at the bottom, and the only way to survive the grinding is to stay small, stay quiet, stay invisible. He should walk away. That was the smart thing, the survival thing. But the crying had sounded young, too young. The pitch of a voice that had not yet learned to swallow its fear, had not yet been taught by the world that crying accomplishes nothing, and silence is the only armor worth wearing. And Cody Wren, despite everything the world had done to him, had not yet learned to stop caring. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. What this homeless boy does in the next 60 minutes will make a 911 operator cry for the first time in 23 years. You do not want to miss that moment. He listened again. Nothing rose from the grate. Just the faint drip of water somewhere deep below, and the ambient hum of a city that never fully sleeps. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe it was a kid or a rat, or the wind doing strange things in the tunnels the way it sometimes did, creating sounds that could pass for human if you were tired enough and lonely enough to want them to be. He started to stand, started to turn away, started to take the first step back toward the overpass and the thin blanket he had stolen from a Goodwill donation bin, and the sleep that was never really sleep, but rather a shallow holding pattern somewhere above unconsciousness. Then it came again, a single ragged sob rising through the metal bars like a hand reaching up from underwater. And this time there was no mistaking it. This was not an animal. This was not the wind. This was a child, a very small child. Cody's hand moved to his chest without thinking, his fingers closing around the small metal object that hung from a cord beneath his shirt. A copper transit token worn smooth by years of touching the edges, rounded by the oil of his skin until the ridges were almost gone. Two words engraved on its surface, words he could trace with his eyes closed, words he had traced 10,000 times in the dark, when the loneliness got so heavy he thought it might actually kill him. I'll return. That token will play its role in this story. And when you discover how, it will steal your breath. His mother had given it to him, the last thing she ever placed in his hand, the last point of contact between her skin and his before she turned and ran toward the thing that would take her away from him forever. The memory came whether he wanted it or not. It always did. Not in pieces, not in fragments, but whole and complete and merciless, like a movie that played on a loop behind his eyes every time he closed them. The apartment on Van Buren Street, 3rd floor. The smoke alarm screaming at 2 in the morning. The sound drilling into his skull before his eyes were even open. His mother, Jolene, already on her feet, already moving, already pulling him from bed and pushing him toward the door, with hands that were strong and steady, even though the hallway was filling with smoke that burned his throat and made his eyes stream. Down the stairs, out the front door, the night air hitting his face like a slap, cool and clean, and impossibly sweet after the choking gray of the stairwell. He turned to look back at the building and saw the flames orange and alive dancing behind the windows of the 2nd floor apartment where the Burkett family lived. Mr. and Mrs. Burkett and their 2 children, ages 3 and 5, who Cody sometimes heard laughing through the floor while he did his homework at the kitchen table. He heard them now, not laughing, screaming. Jolene Wren was not a firefighter. She was not trained in rescue operations. She was a line cook who worked the late shift at a diner on Indian School Road, a woman who came home smelling of grease and coffee and exhaustion, who read library books to her son every night because she could not afford to buy them, who volunteered at the community center on weekends because she believed with a conviction that bordered on faith that helping other people was not a choice. It was an obligation, the price of being alive. She pressed the copper token into Cody's palm. He could still feel the warmth of her hand around his, the pressure of her fingers as they closed his fist around the metal. Keep this for me. Her eyes were fierce and focused, the eyes of a woman who had already made her decision and would not be talked out of it. I will come back for it. I promise. She ran into the building. The flames found her on the 2nd floor landing. She got the Burkett children out, passed them through a window to a neighbor on a ladder, one after the other, their small bodies limp with smoke, but alive. Both of them alive. Then the ceiling came down. Jolene Wren died at 3:47 in the morning. Cody stood on the sidewalk holding a copper token and watching the building burn and waiting for his mother to walk back through the front door the way she had promised. She did not come back. He waited for the fire trucks. He waited for the paramedics. He waited for the police officers who wrapped him in a blanket and asked him questions he could not answer because his voice had stopped working. He waited through the funeral that strangers paid for and the foster placement that happened 3 days later in the family that was supposed to take care of him but did not. The Dunning family, that was the name he tried not to think about. Gerald and Patricia Dunning, who fostered children for the monthly check and treated them like furniture that occasionally needed to be fed. Gerald, who locked the refrigerator at night. Patricia, who smiled for the social worker and stopped smiling the moment the front door closed. Cody lasted 4 months before he climbed out a window and disappeared into the streets of Phoenix. He was 9 years old. The system looked for him for a while. Then it stopped looking. There were too many lost children and not enough people who cared about finding them. Cody Wren became a name in a file, a statistic in a database, a ghost moving through a city of 2 million people who never once looked down and saw him. But he kept the token. Through everything, through the hunger and the cold and the fear and the nights when he pressed himself against the concrete beneath an overpass and listened to the traffic overhead and wondered if anyone in any of those cars would stop if they knew he was down here. He kept the token. I'll return. She had not returned, But maybe, just maybe, he could keep her promise for her. Maybe he could be the person who ran toward the sound of someone crying instead of away from it. Maybe that was what the token was for. Not a reminder of loss, but a reminder of who his mother had been and who she had wanted him to become. Cody's fingers found the edge of the grate, heavy, rusted, set into concrete that had cracked and shifted over decades of Arizona summers, and the freeze-thaw cycles that nobody associated with the desert, but that happened every winter when the temperature dropped below freezing, and the moisture in the ground expanded and contracted and slowly tore the infrastructure apart. He pulled, felt the burn in his shoulders, the strain in his wrists. His hands were small for 11, his arms thin from 2 years of inconsistent meals, and the kind of chronic, low-grade malnutrition that does not kill you outright, but steals your strength one day at a time. Nothing moved. He repositioned, braced his feet against the ground, one on each side of the grate, and pulled again with everything he had. A screech of metal on stone. An inch. 2. The smell hit him first before the opening was wide enough to see through. Rot and moisture and something chemical like cleaning fluid mixed with decay. The Phoenix storm drain system. 600 miles of tunnels beneath the city designed to carry flash floodwaters away from streets that would otherwise become rivers every monsoon season. People died in those tunnels. Cody knew the statistics because he had memorized them the same way he had memorized the survival rules, not because anyone had taught him, but because knowledge was the only weapon a homeless child possessed. 17 deaths in the past decade, mostly homeless, mostly forgotten. People who crawled into the tunnels for shelter and did not crawl out again when the water came. The grate scraped aside another inch. Another. Cody looked down into the darkness and saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. A void that seemed to swallow the faint street light before it could penetrate more than a few feet, a blackness so complete it looked solid like a wall made of shadow. He lowered himself through the opening, hung for a moment by his fingertips, and dropped. The water was colder than he expected, ankle-deep thick with sediment that squelched between his toes, a slurry of mud and debris and things he did not want to identify. His shoes, already held together with duct tape and the stubborn refusal to fall apart that seemed to be the defining characteristic of everything in his life, immediately soaked through. The chill raced up his legs and settled in his chest like a fist. He could not see anything, not his hands in front of his face, not the walls of the tunnel, not the direction he needed to go. The darkness was total, absolute, the kind of darkness that human beings are not designed to exist, in the kind that triggers something primal in the brain, a recognition that this is wrong, that you are not supposed to be here, that whatever lives in places where light has never reached does not want company. But he could listen. The tunnel amplified every sound, turning whispers into echoes and echoes into ghosts. The drip of water somewhere ahead, metronomic and steady. The scratch of claws as rats fled from this new intruder, their bodies brushing against the curved walls as they scrambled for distance. The sound of his own breathing, too fast, too loud, filling the pipe like a bellows. And beneath it all, so faint he almost missed it, a whimper. "I am coming," he said to the darkness. "I hear you. I am coming." The tunnel branched almost immediately, left or right. No way to know which direction led toward the sound and which led deeper into the maze. Cody closed his eyes, which made no difference in the blackness, and listened with every part of himself. His ears, his skin, the fine hairs on the back of his neck that stood up when the faint vibration of the whimper reached him through the air. Left. He moved forward, one hand trailing along the curved wall, the other stretched ahead to feel for obstacles. The pipe was maybe 4 feet in diameter, large enough to walk through if you hunched over, but not large enough to stand. After 100 feet, his back was already aching, the muscles along his spine cramping from the unnatural posture. The whimper came again. Closer. Or was it? Sound did strange things down here, bouncing off concrete, splitting at junctions, creating phantoms that led you deeper into the maze while the source stayed where it was or moved away entirely. You could follow a sound for hours in these tunnels and end up farther from it than when you started. The tunnel narrowed without warning. Cody's outstretched hand hit concrete where there should have been air. A wall. A dead end. He felt around the edges, tracing the obstruction with his fingers, mapping its shape in the darkness. Not a dead end. An opening. Barely 2 feet wide, a crack in the tunnel wall where the concrete had shifted or collapsed, creating a passage that was too small to walk through, too small to even crouch through. He would have to crawl. Cody dropped to his hands and knees. The water soaked through his jeans, his shirt, everything. Cold. So cold his teeth began to chatter, the sound rattling through the pipe like castanets. He thought about turning back. The smart thing. The survival thing. The thing that every rule he had learned in 2 years on the streets told him to do. Then he thought about his mother running into a burning building without hesitation. Thought about the look in her eyes when she pressed the token into his hand. Fierce, focused, already decided. I'll return. And he crawled forward into the darkness. Time lost meaning in the tunnels. Without light, without landmarks, without any frame of reference, except the cold and the dark and the ache in his body, Cody could not tell if he had been crawling for minutes or hours. His knees were raw, the skin torn by concrete that scraped like sandpaper. His palms stung where the grit had embedded itself in the flesh. The cold had seeped so deep into his body that he could not remember what warmth felt like, could not imagine that warmth existed anywhere in the world, that somewhere above him, people slept in beds, with blankets, in heaters, in walls that kept the night out. But the sounds were getting closer. Not just the whimper now. A voice. Small, thin, singing something that might have been a nursery rhyme. The words were too distorted by echoes to understand, bouncing off the walls and splitting into fragments that arrived out of order syllables rearranged by the acoustics of the tunnel into something that sounded like language but was not quite. A child. Definitely a child. Younger than him from the sound of it. 4 years old, maybe 5. The age his mother's voice would have gone soft and careful. Careful, the way it did when she talked to the little kids at the community center. Cody moved faster, ignoring the protest of his muscles, the raw sting of his hands. The tunnel branched again, then again, each junction forcing him to stop to listen, to choose. He was following sound through a maze designed to confuse sound, and he knew with cold certainty that if he made one wrong turn, he might wander until the water rose or his strength gave out. The token bounced against his chest with every movement. A metronome, a heartbeat, a promise, I'll return. Remember the name Ramona Cross. In about 1 hour of this story, she will do something she has not done in 23 years. The pipe widened, suddenly opening into a chamber where 3 tunnels met. Cody pushed himself up from his hands and knees, his back screaming in relief, and looked around. Gray light, faint but real, filtering down from somewhere above, from a grate 20 feet overhead, set into what must be a sidewalk or a parking lot. The light was not sunlight, but street light, orange and dim, barely enough to see by, but after the absolute darkness of the tunnels, it felt like stepping into a cathedral. Cody saw the concrete rubble first. Part of the ceiling had collapsed at one end of the chamber, creating a pocket of debris, chunks of concrete and twisted rebar and broken pipe piled against the wall like the aftermath of a small explosion. Old damage from the look of it, years, maybe decades. The kind of structural failure that cities ignored because fixing it would cost money and nobody important ever came down here anyway. Then he saw the girl. She was sitting in the debris pocket, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself, making her body as small as possible. Blonde hair matted and dirty, hanging in tangles around a face that was streaked with tears and grime. Pink sneakers caked with mud, the laces untied, the soles coming away from the uppers. She was wearing a yellow sundress that had probably been bright once, but was now the color of old newspaper. She was singing to herself. Something about sunshine. Something about happiness. Her voice cracked on the high notes, thin and fragile, but she kept going the same few lines over and over, like a prayer or a spell against the darkness. Like if she stopped singing, the darkness would notice her, and the darkness would be hungry. Cody took a step forward, and the girl's eyes snapped open. They stared at each other across the dim chamber. 2 children in the underground, one who had been lost and one who had come looking. The girl stopped singing. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Cody said, "Hi." The girl's lower lip trembled. The singing had been holding something back, and now that it had stopped, the something was threatening to break through. "Who are you?" "My name is Cody. I heard you crying. I came to help." The girl studied him with the suspicious intensity of a child who has been disappointed too many times. Her eyes moved over his face, his ragged clothes, his bare feet. She was looking for something. Danger, maybe. Or hope. The two things that when you are 4 years old and have been alone in the dark for almost 2 days begin to look exactly the same. Are you a ghost? She asked finally. Cody almost laughed. The sound caught in his throat and came out as something closer to a cough. No, I am real. Are you hurt? The girl shook her head, but her eyes filled with tears that caught the dim light and turned it silver. I cannot get out. I tried and tried, but I cannot climb, and the water was scary, and nobody came. I yelled and yelled, but nobody came. The words tumbled out in a rush. 2 days of terror compressed into a single breath. 2 days of crying for help that did not arrive, of screaming into darknesses that swallowed her voice and gave nothing back. Cody moved closer, slowly, the way you approach a frightened animal. One step at a time, hands visible, voice low and steady. What is your name? The girl sniffled, a wet, ragged sound that echoed off the chamber walls. My name is Birdie. Something cracked in Cody's chest, a small fracture in the armor he had spent 2 years building. Of all the names, of all the children who could have fallen into this darkness. That is a beautiful name, Cody said. He meant it. How did you get down here, Birdie? The story came out in fragments. The way stories come from 4-year-olds without structure or chronology, just images and feelings and the gaps between them. A puppy named Biscuit, her neighbor's new puppy that she was not supposed to chase but did anyway, because it was small and fluffy and fast and she wanted to hold it. A construction site with broken fences, the chain link pulled away from the posts and bent back, creating an opening that was just the right size for a small dog and a smaller girl. A hole in the ground that she thought led to a cave. The fall that happened too fast to scream. The landing that knocked the breath out of her and left her lying in the dark with a pain in her ankle and a confusion so total that she did not cry for several minutes because she could not understand what had happened. Then the hours, the endless hours, light coming through the grate above, then fading. Night, then light again, then night again. 2 cycles of sun and dark, and nobody came. How long have you been down here? Cody asked, though he already knew the answer. Birdie thought about it, her forehead creasing with the effort of counting time. It was daytime when I fell. Then it got dark. Then light came through the holes up there. Then dark again. Then you came. At least 36 hours. Probably closer to 30. A 4-year-old child alone in the dark and the cold with no food and no water and nothing but a nursery rhyme to hold the fear at bay. Okay, Birdie, here is what we are going to do. I am going to find a way to call for help, and then people are going to come and get us out of here. Does that sound good? Birdie nodded, but her fingers found his sleeve and closed around the fabric with a grip that was stronger than anything a 4-year-old should have been capable of. The grip of someone who has learned what it means to be left alone and has decided with every ounce of will in her small body that she will not let it happen again. Do not leave me, please. I do not want to be alone again. Cody looked at her face, at the tear tracks in the dirt, at the fear that had not gone away, not completely, even though help had finally arrived, because she did not know yet that he was help. She did not know yet that he was the kind of person who kept his promises. I will not leave you, he said. I promise. He meant it. Whatever happened next, whatever it cost him, he was not going to break that promise. He had broken enough things in his life already. Lost enough. Given up enough. This one he would keep. The token pressed against his chest. I'll return. This time he would. The phone was half buried in silt 30 feet from where Birdie sat. Cody almost missed it. Just another piece of debris. Another artifact of the world above that had found its way into the darkness. A piece of technology that someone had dropped or thrown away or lost without caring enough to look for it. But something caught his eye. A glint of glass where glass should not be. The faintest reflection of the dim light from the grate above, bouncing off a surface that was smoother than concrete, shinier than mud. He knelt down and dug it out with trembling fingers. A phone. The screen was cracked, a spider web of fractures radiating from one corner. The case was waterlogged, the charging port caked with silt. When he pressed the power button, nothing happened. He tried again. Nothing. Come on. He whispered it like a prayer. Come on. Come on. Come on. He pressed the button and held it. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. A flicker. A logo. The screen lit up with a battery icon showing 3%. 3%, maybe 4 minutes of power, maybe less. Cody looked at the grate above, looked at the phone in his hand, looked at Birdie, who was watching him with waiting, trusting eyes. Her fingers still wrapped around his sleeve, even though he had moved 30 feet away, and she had followed him without being asked, unwilling to let the distance between them grow. He moved to the spot directly beneath the grate, holding the phone up toward the opening, toward the thin sliver of sky that was visible through the metal bars 20 feet above. The signal indicator flickered. Searching, searching. One bar. His fingers found the emergency call button. The phone rang once, twice. 911. What is your emergency? The voice was calm, professional, female, the voice of someone who had answered thousands of calls and had learned to keep the horror at arm's length, to treat every emergency as a puzzle to be solved rather than a tragedy to be felt. The voice of someone who had built a wall between herself and the world and had maintained it for 23 years without a single crack. Ramona Cross adjusted her headset and waited for the caller to speak. Another call, another crisis, another chance to save someone she could not see, could not touch, could only reach through the thin wire of a phone connection that might hold or might not. She was ready. She was always ready. What she was not ready for was what came next. Cody took a breath. I can hear her. There is a little girl down here. She was crying. I found her. We are trapped and we need help. 3 words. I can hear her. On the other end of the line, in a cubicle at the Phoenix Emergency Communications Center, Ramona Cross removed her headset and pressed her hand against her mouth. The other operators turned to stare. In 23 years, they had never seen Ramona cry. Not once. Not when she talked a suicidal teenager off a bridge. Not when she stayed on the line with a man as he bled out in his car on the shoulder of Interstate 10. Not when she guided a mother through the administration of an EpiPen to a child in anaphylactic shock, counting seconds that felt like hours while the ambulance fought through traffic that would not move. But now tears were streaming down her face. I can hear her. 3 words that unlocked something she had kept buried since July of 1996. Since a flash flood swept through the wash behind her house on a Tuesday afternoon in monsoon season. Since her 6-year-old son playing in the backyard while she sat in the same building answering calls not 50 feet away, was carried off by water moving too fast to fight. Emmett, he had been building something in the dirt, a castle or a fort or a spaceship, one of the elaborate constructions he spent hours on, narrating the story to himself as he shaped the mud with his small hands. Ramona could hear him through the window of the dispatch center, his voice rising and falling with the drama of whatever adventure his characters were having. Then the rain started. Not gradually the way rain starts in other places, building from a drizzle to a shower to a downpour. In Phoenix monsoon, rain arrives all at once like someone has turned a fire hose on the sky. One moment the air is drawing hot and still. The next water is falling so hard you cannot see 20 feet in front of you. The wash behind the house went from dry to 3 feet of fast-moving water in less than 4 minutes. Ramona heard it through the window, a roaring sound like a freight train. She stood up from her desk. She walked to the door. She opened it and looked outside and saw the water where the wash had been, in the empty backyard where her son was not. He was gone. They found Emmett 2 miles downstream, wedged against a concrete culvert. He had been dead for approximately 20 minutes. The medical examiner said he probably lost consciousness within the first minute. The water was moving too fast, carrying too much debris. A 6-year-old boy had no chance against it. Emmett would have been 29 now. Would have been married maybe. Would have had children of his own. Would have been alive, breathing, laughing, building things with his hands the way he always had, the way he would have kept doing if his mother had not been sitting 50 feet away, answering someone else's emergency while her own son drowned. Instead, he was a headstone in Greenwood Memory Lawn, a name and 2 dates and the word beloved, which was true but insufficient, a wound that never healed because Ramona would not let it. Healing meant forgiving herself, and she did not deserve forgiveness. So she came to work, every day, every shift. She answered calls and saved strangers and carried the weight of Emmett's absence like a stone in her chest, and she did not cry on. Crying was for people who had the right to grieve. Ramona had lost that right on a Tuesday afternoon in July when she chose her job over her son. I can hear her, a boy in a tunnel, a child he could hear crying in the darkness, a child someone had heard. Not like Emmett, Not like her boy who had cried and no one had heard, who had screamed and no one had come, who had been 50 feet from his mother and might as well have been on the other side of the earth. Ramona put her headset back on. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. 23 years of practice, 23 years of keeping the horror at arm's length, and she could still do this. She could still be the voice on the other end of the line. She could still be the person who guided you through the worst moment of your life, even when her own worst moment was playing on a loop behind her eyes. She could still be the wall. "Where are you?" she said. "Can you tell me your location?" "I do not know exactly. I am in a storm drain. Underground. I came in through a grate near 19th Avenue. I think I have been crawling for a long time. There is a chamber where 3 tunnels meet. There is a grate above me, maybe 20 feet up. I can see a little bit of light." The voice was young, younger than the teenagers who usually called, younger than the adults. This was a child's voice, thin and tired, but clear, the voice of someone who was scared but had not yet surrendered to the fear. "Okay, I need you to stay calm. What is your name?" "Cody. My name is Cody." The voice softened. Not much. Just enough that Cody, standing in the darkness with a dying phone and a 4-year-old girl gripping his sleeve, might have noticed if he had been listening for it. "Okay, Cody. My name is Ramona. I am going to help you. Both of you. Can you tell me about the little girl? Her name is Birdie. She is 4 years old. She fell through a hole at a construction site. She has been down here almost 2 days." Silence on the line. The kind of silence that is not empty but full charged with something that has no name but weighs more than words. Then so quiet, Cody almost missed it, a sound that might have been a sob. On the screen in front of Ramona, the emergency dispatch system showed the location of the call, a cell tower ping that placed the phone somewhere near 19th Avenue and Southern, in the industrial corridor south of downtown. She pulled up the storm drain schematics, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the automatic precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The tunnel network beneath that intersection was extensive. Miles of pipe in a labyrinth that had been built in stages over decades, each addition connecting to the last in ways that made sense on paper but created a maze underground. She flagged the call for priority response. "Fire department, search and rescue, hazmat for the chemical exposure risk." Then she pulled up the weather overlay, and her blood went cold. The National Weather Service had issued a flash flood warning for the Phoenix metropolitan area at 2:45 that morning. A monsoon storm system had been building over the mountains east of the city for hours, drawing moisture from the Gulf of California and converting it into thunderheads that were now moving west at 30 miles per hour. The first rain had already started falling in the higher elevations. Scottsdale was getting hit. Fountain Hills was getting drenched. All that water was flowing downhill, toward Phoenix, toward the storm drain system, toward the tunnels where a boy named Cody and a girl named Birdie were waiting in the dark. Ramona checked the precipitation models, checked the flow rate projections, checked the time to capacity estimates for the tunnel network near 19th and Southern. 20 minutes, maybe less. In 20 minutes, the tunnels would begin to fill. In 30, the water would reach the chamber where the children were trapped. In 40, the chamber would be completely submerged, Cody, Ramona said. Her voice did not waver. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. There is a storm coming. A big one. In about 30 minutes, those tunnels are going to start filling with water. Do you understand what I am telling you?" A pause. She could hear his breathing change, could hear the moment the information landed, the moment he understood what she was saying. Not just that a storm was coming, but that the clock had started and it was counting down towards something that neither of them wanted to name. "Yes," he said, quiet but clear. "I understand. We are sending help. Fire department, rescue teams, everyone we have. But I need you to stay on this line. I need you to keep talking to me. Can you do that?" "Yes, I can do that." "And Cody?" The voice cracked, just slightly. A fracture in the wall so small that only someone who had been listening for 23 years would have heard it. "I need you to promise me something. Promise me you will not let go of that little girl. No matter what happens, no matter how scared you get, you hold on to her. Do you hear me?" Cody looked at Birdie. She had crawled closer while he talked, her small hand now gripping the hem of his shirt, her face turned up toward his with an expression that contained everything a 4-year-old could feel. Fear and trust and the desperate hope that this boy who had appeared from the darkness was real and would not disappear the way the light did every night. "I promise," he said. Ramona closed her eyes. The tears kept falling, but she did not wipe them away. For the first time in 23 years, she let them come. "Okay," she said, "then let us get you both out of there." The clock on the wall read 3:47. They had less than an hour. And on the other end of the line, in the cold and the dark, Cody Wren held a dying phone in one hand and a frightened child in the other and waited for the water to come. The phone beeped. 1%. Ramona heard the beep through the line and recognized it. She had heard that sound before on other calls from other phones that were running out of power at the worst possible moment. The sound of time running out. "Cody," she said, "if the water starts rising, if it looks like you are not going to make it, I need you to take Birdie to the highest point you can find. Get her as high as possible. Even a few feet can make the difference. Keep her talking. Keep her awake. Hypothermia is going to be a factor. The colder she gets, the sleepier she will feel. Do not let her fall asleep. Talk to her. Sing to her. Whatever it takes. I will." The phone beeped again. The screen flickered. "Cody," Ramona said, "I want you to know something. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, you are the bravest person I have ever spoken to. What you did tonight, crawling through those tunnels, finding that little girl staying with her, that is not something most people could do. That is not something most people would even try." The screen went dark for a moment, then lit up again. 0%. Somehow still working. Borrowed time. "I did not have a choice," Cody said. "She needed help. We always have a choice. You chose to be brave. You chose to care. And I want you to know that whatever happens, I am proud of you. I am so proud of you." The phone beeped one final time. Ramona, Cody said quickly, "If I do not make it, if something happens, will you tell people about me? Will you tell them I tried?" Silence on the line. The hiss of static. The faint drip of water in the tunnels. And then, barely audible, the voice of a woman who had not cried in 23 years and was now crying for the second time in 5 minutes. "You are going to tell them yourself. Because you are going to make it. Both of you. I believe that." The phone died. The screen went black. The line went silent. Cody stared at the dark glass for a long moment. Then he tucked the phone into his pocket and looked at Birdie. "Okay," he said, "we need to find the highest spot in this chamber. Can you help me look?" Birdie nodded. Her face was pale but determined. "What are we looking for?" "Anywhere we can climb. A ledge, a pile of rocks, anything that gets us higher than the floor." They moved through the chamber together, hand in hand. The boy who had crawled 2 miles through darkness and the girl who had waited 2 days for someone to hear her, both of them searching for something to stand on when the water came. In her cubicle at the Phoenix Emergency Communications Center, Ramona wiped her eyes, straightened her headset, and began making the calls that would determine whether Cody Wren and Birdie Thorne lived or died. She called fire dispatch. She called the police. She pulled up every schematic, every maintenance record, every piece of data she could find about the tunnel network beneath 19th and Southern. She cross-referenced the storm drain maps with the construction permits filed for the area, looking for the access points, the entry hatches, the places where rescue teams could get in. And when she found them blocked, collapsed, inaccessible, she did not stop. She did not accept the limitation. She did not follow procedure. Because procedure had cost her a son 23 years ago. Procedure had kept her at her desk while Emmett drowned 50 feet away. Procedure was the wall she had built between herself and the world, and tonight, for the first time since July of 1996, Ramona Cross was going to tear it down. She picked up the phone and made one more call. Not to the fire department, not to the police, not to anyone in the system that was supposed to save children, but had failed the boy who called her, and the girl who waited in the dark, and the son she would never hold again. She called someone else entirely, and what happened next would change everything. The storm was still 40 minutes away when the first argument began. Harlan Thorne stood in the parking lot of the South Mountain Search Command Post, surrounded by police cruisers and fire trucks, and volunteers who had been looking for his daughter for 18 hours. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, not from exhaustion, though both of those had carved deep lines into his face over the past day and a half. His hands were shaking from something that lived in the space between rage and terror. Something that had no name, but felt like it was eating him alive from the inside out. 47 years old, a mechanic by trade, a man who fixed engines and straightened frames and made broken things work again. Hands that could strip a transmission in the dark, that could feel the difference between a worn bearing and a cracked one just by touch. Hands that had held his daughter on the day she was born, that had caught her the first time she tried to walk, that had brushed the hair from her forehead every night before bed. He had not tucked Birdie into bed in 2 days, had not known if he would ever do it again. His phone had rung 3 minutes ago. Not the police, not the search coordinator, not any of the officials who had spent 18 hours combing the desert east of the city, searching mile after mile of open terrain, because someone had reported seeing a small girl near the hiking trails, and the report had sent every resource in the wrong direction. The call came from a dispatcher, a woman with a voice that carried the careful steadiness of someone accustomed to delivering news that could shatter a person's world. She told him his daughter had been found alive, underground, in a storm drain near 19th Avenue, found by a homeless boy who had crawled 2 miles through darkness to reach her. Harlan had not asked questions, had not waited for details. He ended the call, walked to his motorcycle, and started the engine. The command post was 7 miles from 19th Avenue. He could make it in 6 minutes if traffic cooperated, 5 if it did not, and he stopped caring about traffic laws. A police captain stepped into his path, middle-aged, tired, the kind of official who had been trained to manage situations rather than solve them, to contain chaos rather than engage with it. The kind of man who believed that procedure existed for a reason, and that the reason was always good enough. "Mr. Thorne, we need you to wait here. The fire department is en route. They have protocols for confined space rescue. If you show up there, you will only complicate things." Harlan looked at the man, really looked at him, studied the wedding ring on his finger, the lines around his eyes that came from squinting into the sun or staying up too late with paperwork. This was a man who went home to his family every night, who opened the front door and heard voices calling him from somewhere inside the house, who sat at a dinner table where every chair was occupied. "My daughter has been underground for almost 2 days." Harlan's voice was dangerously quiet. The kind of quiet that people who knew him recognized as far more threatening than shouting. "There is a flash flood warning. If I wait for your protocols, she could drown. Sir, I understand your concern, but you do not understand anything." Harlan stepped forward. The captain stepped back. It was involuntary, the kind of retreat that the body performs before the mind can stop it. "You have spent 18 hours searching the desert while my daughter was under your feet. Your search teams walked right past the grate she fell through. Your officers told me to stay calm, to trust the process, to let the professionals handle it." He leaned closer. The captain could smell the diesel and leather and 40 hours of unwashed fear. "Where is my daughter right now, Captain?" "In a hole in the ground, found by a homeless kid who did what your entire department could not do. So do not tell me to wait for protocols. Do not tell me to trust the process. The process failed. The system failed. And if you try to stop me from getting to my daughter, you will find out exactly what I am capable of." The captain opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Before he could speak, the sound of engines filled the parking lot. Motorcycles, dozens of them, roaring into the command post like a wave of chrome and leather, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like searchlights sweeping a battlefield. They parked in formation, 37 riders dismounting in near unison, their boots hitting asphalt with a collective impact that sounded like a drum roll. Harlan turned to face them, his brothers, his sisters, the men and women he had ridden with for 20 years, who had answered his call without hesitation when Birdie disappeared, who had searched through the night without complaint, covering ground that the official search teams had missed or ignored or deemed too difficult to access. Sledge stepped forward first. 6'3", arms like the trunks of mesquite trees, thick and hard and covered in ink that told the story of a life most people would not want to hear about. A face that had been scaring people since childhood, not because he tried, but because God had assembled it from spare parts that did not quite fit together. Brow too heavy, jaw too wide, eyes set deep beneath a forehead that looked like it had been designed to stop bullets. But those eyes were soft when he looked at Harlan. We heard Sledge said, "Dispatch scanner, she is alive." Harlan nodded. He did not trust his voice. "Where, 19th and Southern, near the power substation. Sledge turned to the assembled riders, 37 faces hard and focused, waiting for the word that would send them forward. You heard him. We ride. The captain tried one more time. Now wait just a minute. You cannot just. 37 engines roared to life simultaneously. The sound drowned out whatever the captain said next. It drowned out the sirens and the radio chatter and the distant rumble of thunder that was moving closer by the minute. And by the time the noise faded, Harlan Thorne and his brothers were already gone. In 40 minutes, 217 bikers would arrive at that scene. But right now, it was just the beginning. 4 miles from the storm drain, where two children waited to be saved, the city council building sat dark and mostly empty in the pre-dawn hours. But on the third floor in a conference room with windows that overlooked the parking garage, lights were on. Vincent Hale was having a very bad morning, 53 years old, city councilman for District 7, a man who had built his career on fiscal responsibility and risk management on the principle that government existed to make hard decisions, and that hard decisions were by definition the ones that made people uncomfortable. He prided himself on his ability to separate emotion from policy, to look at a situation and see not the human cost, but the financial implications, the legal exposure, the precedent that any decision would set for the decisions that came after. Right now, the hard decision was whether to authorize emergency excavation funding. We are talking about $200,000, he said, staring at the faces around the table. The fire chief, whose jaw was clenched so tight and the muscles in his neck were visible from across the room. The city attorneys, whose eyes moved between Hale and the clock on the wall with increasing frequency. The budget officials who had been dragged from their beds and were still trying to understand why this could not wait until morning. Minimum, probably more, for a confined space rescue that may or may not be successful. Sir, the fire chief's voice was level, but there was something beneath it, something that was being held in check by professionalism and nothing else. There are two children trapped in that tunnel, a 4-year-old girl and an 11-year-old boy. We have less than 40 minutes before the storm hits. I understand the timeline, but we have procedures for a reason. If we authorize excavation without proper structural assessment and something goes wrong, the city will be liable for millions. Something is already going wrong. There are children underground. Hale held up his hand, the gesture of a man who was accustomed to being the final word in a room and who expected the room to comply. And the fire department is en route, correct? You have rescue teams on standby. Yes, but we cannot access the chamber without excavation. The collapse has blocked the main entry points. We need heavy equipment to break through. Then use the equipment. We cannot. Not without authorization from the city. The budget for emergency excavation was frozen last month during the review process. We need council approval to release the funds. Hale sat back in his chair. The leather creaked beneath his weight. Around the table, faces waited, everyone looking to him for the decision that would determine what happened next. The smart decision, the responsible decision. The decision that would protect the city's interests and his own career and the system that had made both possible. How confident are you that excavation will succeed in 30 minutes? The fire chief hesitated. A fraction of a second, but Hale caught it. We would need to assess the site first, determine the safest approach, run calculations on structural integrity. So you cannot guarantee success. I cannot guarantee anything. But if we do not try, those children will almost certainly drown. Hale nodded slowly. He turned to the city attorney. What is our liability exposure if we authorize excavation and something goes wrong? Significant. If a rescue worker is injured, if the excavation causes additional collapse, if the children are harmed during the operation, we could be looking at lawsuits totaling $10 to $15 million. And if we do not authorize excavation, the attorney shifted in his seat. That depends on how the situation unfolds. If the children survive through other means, probably minimal exposure. If they do not survive, Hale held up his hand again. I understand. He looked around the table one more time, at the fire chief whose jaw had not unclenched, at the attorneys who were studying the surface of the conference table as though it contained the answers they were too afraid to give out loud, at the clock on the wall which showed 4:03 in the morning. We cannot set a precedent of bypassing safety protocols every time there is an emergency. The procedures exist for a reason. If we start making exceptions, we undermine the entire system. Sir. The fire chief stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp and sudden in the quiet room. This is not just any emergency. This is 2 children who will die if we do not act. Hale's expression did not change. The fire department has rescue teams on standby. Use them. Find alternative access points. Do what you can with the resources you have. But I am not authorizing $200,000 in emergency excavation without proper assessment. The chief stared at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. The professionalism was gone. What remained was something rawer, something that had been building for 22 years of pulling bodies from wreckage and watching politicians make calculations about the value of human life. You know what I think, Councilman? I think you are more worried about your budget than those kids. I think you would rather let them die than risk a lawsuit. And I think that when this is over, everyone is going to know exactly what you are. He walked out of the conference room. Hale watched him go, then turned to his staff. I want this conversation documented, everything that was said. We need to be clear that we offered all available resources within proper channels. Any accusations of negligence will be unfounded. None of them noticed the aide in the corner, the young woman who had been sitting so quietly that she had become part of the furniture. Another shadow in a room full of people too focused on their own calculations to register her presence. Tessa Ridley, 26 years old, administrative assistant, a woman who had taken this job because she believed in public service and was now watching public service and fail in real time. Her phone was in her lap. The recording app was running. It had been running since the meeting began. 17 minutes of footage. Vincent Hale's voice clear and clinical, explaining why procedure was more important than children. The fire chief's desperation. The attorney's discomfort. In one sentence that would follow Hale for the rest of his life, spoken with the casual cruelty of a man who had forgotten that the numbers on his spreadsheet represented actual human beings. Homeless children are not our priority. We have limited resources. We cannot spend public money recklessly just because the situation feels urgent. That recording would be seen by 27 million people within 48 hours. And Vincent Hale would regret every word, but that was later. Right now, underground, the water was starting to rise. In her cubicle at the Emergency Communications Center, Ramona Cross heard the denial come through on the internal channel. She heard the fire chief's frustration. She heard the bureaucratic language that meant 2 children were going to die while grown men argued about money. And something inside her, something that had been dormant for 23 years, something she had kept locked away behind procedure and professionalism and the careful discipline of never getting too close to any call, woke up. She had followed the rules once. She had been at her desk doing her job, following procedure, while her son drowned 50 feet away. She had done everything right and lost everything that mattered. Not again. Ramona pulled up the storm drain schematics on her screen. She cross-referenced the tunnel network with the structural engineering reports filed with the city, looking for weak points, looking for places where the ground above the tunnels was thin enough to break through. She found it, a section near the intersection of 19th and Southern, where a previous collapse had created a void space that extended almost to the surface. 8 feet of dirt and debris between the chamber where the children waited and the open air above. She picked up the phone, not the dispatch line, not the emergency channel. Her personal phone, the one she kept in her purse and never used on shift because personal calls during work hours were a violation of department policy. She called the number that had been flagged in the missing child report, the father's number. Harlan Thorne answered on the first ring. Mr. Thorne, this is Ramona Cross. I am the 911 dispatcher who spoke with the boy who found your daughter. Where is she? Tell me exactly where she is. I'm going to. But first you need to know something. The city has denied the request for emergency excavation equipment. The fire chief asked for funding to dig the children out and was turned down by a councilman who decided that procedure was more important than your daughter's life. Silence on the line. The sound of wind and engine noise, a man on a motorcycle moving fast through empty streets. The structural weakness is at the intersection of 19th and Southern and Ramona continued, 10 feet west of the main storm grate. The void space from the original collapse extends to within 8 feet of the surface. If someone digs there, they can break through to the chamber without causing additional collapse. She paused. The city will not send equipment, but I can tell you exactly where to dig. She was breaking every rule in the book. sharing operational information with a civilian, bypassing the chain of command, providing tactical guidance to someone who was not authorized to conduct a rescue operation. If anyone found out she would lose her job, her pension, 23 years of service, erased in a single phone call. Ramona did not care. How deep, Harlan said. 8 feet, maybe 10. The soil is desert hardpan mixed with construction fill. You will need tools, picks, shovels, anything that can move dirt. I have 200 people who can move dirt. Then I suggest you hurry. The storm is 20 minutes out. Maybe less, ma'am. Yes, thank you. The line went dead. Ramona placed her phone back in her purse, straightened her headset, and returned to her dispatch screen. Her hands were still shaking, but her jaw was set and her eyes were dry, and somewhere in the place where her grief lived, next to the memory of Emmett's laugh and the weight of 23 years of silence, something new had taken root. Not hope exactly. Something harder than hope. Something with teeth. Harlan reached the scene at 4:23. He dismounted before his motorcycle had fully stopped, letting it fall to the asphalt as he ran toward the cluster of firefighters near the storm drain grate. His brothers formed a wall behind him, 37 riders who had followed him from the command post, their faces hard with purpose. "Where is she?" Harlan demanded. "Where is my daughter?" A fire captain stepped forward, the same captain who had been on the phone with the chief who had heard the denial him down from City Hall, who was now standing in a parking lot with equipment he could not use and orders he was not allowed to disobey. His expression was caught between frustration and something that looked very much like shame. "Mr. Thorne, we have located the chamber where the children are trapped. It is approximately 40 feet below the surface, accessible through a collapsed section of the main drainage tunnel. But the access points are blocked by debris. We need excavation equipment, heavy machinery, and we need authorization to use it." Authorization from who? The city council. "We submitted an emergency request 20 minutes ago. It was denied." Harlan went very still. The kind of still that people who knew him recognized as the moment before something happened that could not be taken back. Denied. Councilman Hale determined that proper structural assessment was required before any excavation could proceed. He cited liability concerns, budget constraints, standard procedure for emergency infrastructure intervention. Around Harlan, the bikers shifted. A collective movement, subtle but unmistakable, like a predator adjusting its weight before a charge. Sledge stepped forward, his massive hands curling into fists. "Let me make sure I understand," Sledge said. His voice was calm in the way that a loaded weapon is calm. "There are 2 children drowning under our feet right now, and some politician in a suit decided that paperwork was more important than their lives." "That is correct. And you are just going to stand here and let them die?" The captain's jaw tightened. His eyes moved from Sledge to Harlan to the growing crowd of bikers filling the parking lot. "I have been a firefighter for 22 years. I have pulled bodies out of car wrecks and house fires and every other kind of disaster this city can produce. Do you think I want to stand here? Do you think any of us want to stand here?" He gestured at his crew, at the men and women in turnout gear, who were watching the exchange with expressions that bordered on mutiny. "We want to dig. We want to save those kids. But if we proceed without authorization and something goes wrong, every single one of us loses our job, our pension, everything we have worked for, and the city gets sued. And the next time something like this happens, there will be even more red tape, even more delays." Harlan listened. He heard every word. He understood the logic, the calculation, the careful weighing of risk against reward that governed the decisions of men who had something to lose. Harlan Thorne had nothing to lose except the little girl underground. He turned to face the crowd of bikers that had assembled behind him. 217 men and women. Some wore the patches of the club. Others were from affiliated groups or independent riders who had simply heard the call on the emergency network and come. Las Vegas, Tucson, Flagstaff. They had come from everywhere, from every direction, converging on this patch of ground like iron phalanxes drawn to a magnet, Brothers Harlan said. His voice carried across the crowd, clear and strong, and heavy with the weight of what he was about to ask. "Sisters, you heard the man. The city says we cannot dig. The politicians say we have to wait. The system says procedure is more important than my daughter's life." He paused. The silence was absolute. 217 people holding their breath. "I say different." The response was immediate. A roar of agreement that drowned out the rumble of distant thunder. 217 voices declaring that they did not care about procedure, did not care about authorization, did not care about anything except the two children trapped beneath their feet. Shovels, Harlan said. Picks. Anything that can move dirt. We dig by hand if we have to. We dig until our fingers bleed. But we do not stop until those kids are out. The crowd surged forward. Within seconds, tools were appearing from saddlebags and truck beds in the hands of civilians who had heard the commotion and come from their homes carrying whatever they could find. Shovels and picks and pry bars and crowbar and garden trowels and bare hands, all converging on the spot that Ramona Cross had identified. 10 feet west of the main grate, the void space, the weak point. Wait, the fire captain's voice cut through the noise. If you dig in the wrong place, you could cause another collapse. You could bury those children instead of saving them. Harlan turned to face him. Then tell us where to dig. Help us do this right or get out of the way. The captain hesitated. His career was on the line. His pension, everything he had worked for over 22 years. One wrong decision and it was all gone. But somewhere below his feet, two children were drowning. He made his choice. The structural weakness is there, he said, pointing to a spot 10 feet from the grate. The original collapse created a void space that extends almost to the surface. If you dig there, you might be able to break through without causing additional collapse. Might. It is the best chance we have. Then let us get to work. The first shovel bit into the earth at 4:27 in the morning. The dirt was desert hardpan baked by decades of Arizona sun into something that was closer to stone than soil. Each shovel strike sent vibrations up through the handles and into the arms of the diggers, a jarring impact that would leave bruises and blisters and torn calluses on every hand that touched a tool. Nobody cared. The news cameras captured everything. Gretchen Malloy had positioned herself at the edge of the excavation, her cameraman tracking the action as 200 people attacked the ground with everything they had. Bikers in leather vests worked alongside firefighters in turnout gear. Police officers who had abandoned any pretense of controlling the situation grabbed shovels and joined the effort. Ordinary citizens, some still in their pajamas, dug with garden trowels and bare hands. This is incredible, Gretchen said into her microphone, broadcasting live to viewers across the Phoenix metropolitan area. I have never seen anything like this. The official rescue has been stalled by bureaucratic red tape, so the community has taken matters into their own hands. Motorcycle club members, firefighters, police officers, civilians, all of them working together to save two children who are running out of time. 27 million people would eventually see this footage, and the man who blocked this rescue would never recover from what it revealed about him. The rain started at 4:31, light at first, just a misting that dampened hair and made the ground slick beneath the diggers' feet, but everyone knew what was coming. The storm system that had been building over the mountains was moving faster than predicted, dropping inches of rain on terrain that had been baked dry for months. All that water had to go somewhere. It was going into the tunnels. "Dig faster!" Harlan shouted over the sound of shovels striking earth. "We are running out of time." The hole was 3 feet deep now, 4. The dirt came up muddy and dark, mixed with debris from decades of urban accumulation. Glass and plastic and rusted metal and things no one wanted to identify. Sledge had stripped off his leather vest and was attacking the ground with a pickaxe, each swing driving 6 inches into the packed earth. The muscles in his back moved like machinery, relentless and powerful, a man built for exactly this kind of work. Beside him, Kellaway worked with equal ferocity. A firefighter of 14 years, a woman who had chosen this profession because she believed in saving people and was now doing it in direct defiance of the orders she had been given. Her face was streaked with mud and rain, her arms trembling from exertion, but she did not slow down. She did not stop. How deep, she gasped between swings. The fire captain consulted his phone where a schematic of the tunnel system was displayed. Maybe 10 more feet. The void space should start around 8 feet down. 10 feet, with hand tools. In the rain. The math was brutal and everyone knew it. Underground, the water was rising. Cody heard it before he felt it. A rumbling in the distance, low and steady like thunder that never stopped. The sound of water moving through pipes that had been dry for months, awakening to the storm that was still somewhere above them, but whose reach was already extending down into the darkness. The first trickle arrived almost gently, a stream of brown water flowing through the tunnel entrance, spreading across the chamber floor like a stain. It mixed with the ankle-deep water that was already there, raising the level by an inch. Then two, then four. Cody had positioned himself and Birdie on the debris pile at the far end of the chamber. The collapsed ceiling had created a slope of concrete and rebar and broken pipe rising maybe 8 feet above the floor. Not high, not nearly high enough, but it was the best they had. Cody, Birdie's voice was small. The water is moving. I know. It is okay. We are up here. We are safe. He was lying. He knew he was lying. Birdie probably knew it too, because 4-year-olds have an instinct for deception that adults lose somewhere along the way, a built-in detector that registers the gap between what someone says and what someone means. But she did not call him on it. She pressed closer to his side and wrapped her arms around his arm and held on. The water rose faster than Cody expected. What had started as a trickle became a flow, then a surge, then something that did not have a name but felt alive, a moving mass of dark water carrying debris and mud and the accumulated filth of a city's drainage system. It covered the chamber floor in minutes. Then it started climbing. Their feet, their ankles, their shins, their knees. Cody moved higher on the debris pile, pulling Birdie with him. The concrete was rough and the rebar was sharp, and the footing was treacherous, each step a negotiation between the need to go higher and the risk of slipping and falling into the water that was now waist deep and still climbing. I am cold, Birdie said. Her voice had changed, quieter, dreamy. The edges of her words were softening, blurring together, the first signs of hypothermia settling into her small body. I know. I'm cold too, but we need to stay awake. Can you do that for me? Can you keep talking? Birdie nodded, but her eyelids were heavy. The cold was pulling her down, not into the water, but into something deeper. A place where the fear did not reach, and the darkness was warm and inviting, and all you had to do was close your eyes and let it take you. Tell me a story, Birdie whispered. A story. Mommy used to tell me stories when I was scared. About princesses and dragons and happy endings. Can you tell me one? Cody's jaw was clenching from the cold. His body was shaking, every muscle contracting in a futile attempt to generate heat. The water was at his chest now. He lifted Birdie onto his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair for balance, her weight pushing him deeper into the debris pile but keeping her above the surface. Once upon a time, he said there was a boy who lived under a bridge. Was he a prince? No, he was just a boy. He did not have a family or a home or anyone who cared about him, but he had something special. A magic token that his mother gave him before she went away. What did the token do? It helped him be brave. Whenever he was scared, he would hold the token and remember that his mother loved him, and that gave him the strength to do hard things. The water touched his chin. He tilted his head back, breathing through his nose, speaking in bursts between breaths that were getting shorter and shallower as the water climbed. One day, the boy heard someone crying in a dark place underground, and even though he was scared, he went to help. Did he find them? Birdie's voice was barely there now, a thread of sound that might snap at any moment. Yes, he found a princess, a real one, with golden hair and a beautiful name. What was her name? Birdie. The water closed over Cody's head. He held his breath, held Birdie above him, felt her small body shifting on his shoulders, felt her hands tightening in his hair, felt the desperate thrashing as she realized what was happening, that the boy who had promised not to leave her was disappearing beneath the surface, and she could not reach him, and could not save him, and could not do anything except hold on. Cody, Cody, I cannot feel you. Where are you? He could not answer, could not speak, could only hold on. His lungs burning, his vision going white at the edges, his body screaming for air that was not there. The token pressed against his chest, cold metal against cold skin, the last thing he would feel if this was the end. I'll return, I promise, I promise. Above him, the sound of metal striking stone, the scrape of shovels, voices shouting muffled by the water, but real, so real, getting closer. Then light, blinding, brilliant, cutting through the water like a blade. And hands, strong hands reaching down from above, grabbing Birdie, lifting her up and out of the water and into the air and the light and the rain that was falling on the surface world where people breathed and lived and did not drown in the dark. Get the girl. Get her up, Harlan's voice ragged with terror and relief, his arms reaching into the hole, grabbing his daughter, pulling her to his chest, feeling her heartbeat against his, the sound he had been afraid he would never hear again. Daddy. Birdie's voice in his ear, thin and cracked, but alive. Daddy, you have to get Cody. He held me up. He held me up the whole time. He did not let go. Harlan handed his daughter to Sledge, who wrapped her in someone's jacket and held her against his massive chest like she was made of glass. Then Harlan grabbed the rope that someone had tied to the bumper of a fire truck and turned back toward the hole. The water had risen another 6 inches in the 30 seconds since they had pulled Birdie out. The fire captain grabbed Harlan's arm. The water level is too high. If you go down there now, my daughter is alive because of that boy. Harlan shook off the grip. I am not leaving him to drown. He lowered himself into the hole. The water closed over his head almost immediately. He fought downward, following the rope, his hands searching the darkness for something solid, something human, something alive. His fingers found an arm, thin, cold, motionless. He grabbed it and pulled, fighting the current that was trying to rip the boy away from him, kicking toward the surface that seemed impossibly far above. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed. The cold was stealing the strength from his limbs, making every movement feel like pushing through wet concrete. But he did not let go. He broke the surface, gasping, dragging Cody with him, holding the boy's head above the water. The rope went taut and hands reached down from above, grabbing both of them, hauling them upward toward the light. They emerged into chaos, rain falling hard, flashlights swinging, voices shouting over each other. Paramedics swarmed around them, pulling Cody from Harlan's grip, laying him on the muddy ground. The boy was not breathing. Chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rescue breaths, more compressions. The paramedic's hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his face was growing grimmer with each cycle. The rain hammered down on all of them, turning the excavation site into a swamp, plastering hair to foreheads, and running into eyes that were already blurred with tears and exhaustion. 1 minute, no response. 2 minutes, nothing. Call it, someone said quietly. The words barely audible above the rain, spoken with the reluctant finality of someone who had been trained to recognize the difference between a rescue and a recovery. Number Kellaway pushed through the circle of paramedics, dropped to her knees in the mud beside Cody's body. She tilted his head back, checked his airway, and began compressions with a ferocity that went beyond training, beyond protocol, beyond anything that could be explained by professional obligation. You are not dying, she said through gritted teeth. Not after everything you did. Not after what you survived. You are not dying on my watch. Compress, compress, compress. Each one harder than the last. Each one a refusal to accept the verdict that the silence was delivering. Come on, kid. Come on. And then a cough. Water spewing from a small mouth. Eyes flying open wide and panicked lungs gasping for air with the desperate hunger of someone who had been holding their breath for longer than the body could bear. Cody Wren came back from wherever he had been. The crowd erupted. 200 people cheering in the rain, their voices rising above the thunder, celebrating the survival of a boy most of them had never met. Firefighters hugging bikers, police officers wiping tears from their eyes, civilians embracing strangers like they were family. And in the middle of it all, Cody looked up at the faces surrounding him, at the sky that was gray and wet, in the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and said the only words that mattered. Where is Birdie? Is she okay? Harlan pushed through the crowd and knelt beside the boy who had saved his daughter. She is okay. His voice broke on the second word. Because of you, she is alive. Because of you. Cody's eyes found his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain fell. The crowd waited. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the valley like an afterthought. I promised her. Cody said, I promised I would not let go. Harlan nodded. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the rain indistinguishable from it. You kept your promise. You kept your promise. And then he reached down and pulled Cody into his arms, held the homeless boy who had saved his daughter, held him the way you hold something precious, something irreplaceable, something you almost lost and are never going to let go of again. held him and let him feel what it was like to be valued, to be wanted, to matter to someone in a world that had spent 2 years telling him he did not matter at all. Around them, the rain began to ease, and somewhere above the clouds, the first light of dawn broke through. In her cubicle at the Phoenix Emergency Communications Center, Ramona Cross sat with her headset on and her hands folded in her lap and listened to the rescue unfold through the fire department's open channel. She heard the shovels. She heard the shouting. She heard the moment they broke through and the moment they pulled Birdie out and the moment Harlan went back in for Cody. She heard the 2 minutes of silence that followed, the compressions, the breathing, the waiting. He is not breathing. The words came through the channel like a knife. Ramona closed her eyes. Emmett's face appeared behind her eyelids. 6 years old, brown hair that would not stay flat no matter how many times she smoothed it down. A gap-toothed smile that could light up a room. The last time she saw that smile, he had been running toward the backyard with a plastic shovel in his hand, already narrating the adventure he was about to have. Then Kellaway's voice, fierce and desperate. "You are not dying on my watch." Then silence. Then a cough. Then cheering. "He is alive. He is breathing. We have him." Ramona Cross put her face in her hands and wept. Not the quiet tears of someone trying to maintain composure, not the controlled grief of a professional managing her emotions. She wept openly, loudly, without restraint, the way she had not wept since July of 1996, since the day the water took her son, and she decided that crying was something she would never do again. She had been wrong about that. She had been wrong about a lot of things, but not about this. Not about the boy who had called her from the darkness and told her he could hear a child crying. Not about the decision to break the rules, to make the call, to do the thing that 23 years of protocol and professionalism and grief had told her she was not allowed to do. She had heard a child this time. She had not looked away. She had not followed procedure. She had reached through the line and done everything in her power to bring 2 children home. It would not bring Emmett back. Nothing would bring Emmett back. But for the first time in 23 years, the weight of his absence felt like something she could carry rather than something that was crushing her. Ramona dried her eyes, straightened her headset, looked at the dispatch screen where new calls were already queuing up, new emergencies, new voices in the dark waiting for someone to answer. She pressed the button. 911. What is your emergency? The video dropped at 6:14 in the morning. 17 minutes of footage recorded on a personal phone by a city council aide named Tessa Ridley, 26 years old. A woman who had taken a job in public service because she believed that government could be a force for good, that the people who held power could be trusted to use it wisely, that the systems designed to protect citizens actually worked. She did not believe any of those things anymore. She had sat in the corner of that conference room for 43 minutes watching Vincent Hale make decisions about children's lives with the same detachment he might have brought to a discussion about parking meter revenue. She had watched him weigh the cost of 2 small bodies against the cost of a lawsuit and decide that the lawsuit was the greater threat. She had listened to him say words that she would never forget, words that had burned themselves into her memory the way a brand burns into hide. Homeless children are not our priority. We have limited resources. We cannot spend public money recklessly just because the situation feels urgent. Tessa had recorded everything. The fire chief's desperation, the attorney's discomfort. Hale's voice cold and measured, explaining why procedure mattered more than survival. She had captured every word, every pause, every moment of calculated indifference. She uploaded the video to 3 platforms simultaneously: YouTube, Twitter, the tip line for the local news station where Gretchen Malloy worked. Then she walked out of her apartment, got in her car, and drove to 19th Avenue to see if the children that she had tried to save were still alive. By 7 in the morning, the video had 200,000 views. By 8, it was the top trending topic on every social media platform. By 9, every major news network in the country was running at their anchors' faces arranged in expressions of carefully calibrated outrage that for once was not manufactured. The headlines wrote themselves. City councilman calls homeless children not our priority, while rescue is blocked. Phoenix official denies emergency funding as kids face drowning. Bureaucratic nightmare nearly kills 2 children in Arizona's storm drain. The comment sections erupted, rage and disbelief and demands for accountability. Thousands of voices joining together in a chorus of condemnation that grew louder with every passing minute, every share, every repost. The algorithm fed on the anger pushed the video higher, spread it wider until there was no corner of the internet where Vincent Hale's face was not staring back at the people who were learning to hate him. 27 million views in 48 hours. A number that meant nothing in the abstract, but meant everything when it was attached to the face of a man who had chosen paperwork over children. Hale woke at 7:30 to 17 missed calls from his chief of staff. He did not understand what was happening at first, did not understand why his phone kept vibrating against the nightstand, why his email inbox showed 400 unread messages, why his doorbell was ringing with a persistence that suggested whoever was pressing it had no intention of stopping. Then he turned on the television. His face stared back at him from the screen. His voice played through the speakers, his words stripped of the context he believed justified them, repeated on a loop like evidence at a trial. Homeless children are not our priority. Hale's first instinct was to call his lawyer. His second was to call his public relations team. His third was to close the curtains and pretend that the world outside his house did not exist. He did none of those things. Instead, he put on his best suit, the charcoal gray one that his wife had picked out for him 2 years ago, the one he wore to council meetings and fundraisers, and the public appearances where image mattered more than substance. He combed his hair. He practiced his most reasonable expression in the mirror, the one that said, "I am a serious man dealing with a complicated situation, and the people criticizing me simply do not understand the complexity of governance." Then he drove to City Hall to hold a press conference that would go down in history as one of the most catastrophic political performances the state of Arizona had ever witnessed. Ladies and gentlemen, he began standing at a podium that suddenly seemed much smaller than it had the last time he stood behind it. I want to address the video that has been circulating online. The recording you have seen was taken out of context and does not represent the full picture of what happened last night. He paused, waiting for the questions that would give him an opening to explain, to contextualize, to reframe the narrative in terms that made him look like a responsible leader rather than a man who had calculated the dollar value of a child's life. The questions that came were not the ones he had prepared for. Councilman Hale, a reporter in the front row, do you regret saying that homeless children are not a priority? That statement was part of a larger discussion about resource allocation. It has been removed from its original context to create a misleading impression. The children almost died. Do you regret your decision? I made the best decision I could with the information available at the time. We have procedures in place for emergency response, and those procedures are designed to protect both the public and the first responders who put their lives at risk during rescue operations. A boy named Cody crawled 2 miles through a storm drain to save a 4-year-old girl. While you were worried about liability, he was risking his life. Do you have anything to say to him? The composure cracked, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes, a stiffness in the jaw, the involuntary reaction of a man who was accustomed to controlling the room and was discovering that the room no longer belonged to him. I am not going to stand here and be lectured about priorities by people who do not understand the complexities of municipal governance. Every day I make decisions that affect millions of lives. Every day I have to balance competing interests and limited resources. If I authorized emergency spending every time someone claimed there was an urgent situation, we would be bankrupt within a year. So you stand by your decision. I stand by the process. I stand by the system that has served this city for decades. One emotional story does not invalidate the need for proper procedure. From the back of the room, a voice he recognized, Gretchen Malloy, the reporter who had been broadcasting live from the rescue site, who had stood in the rain with her microphone and watched 200 people dig with their bare hands while the city government sat in a conference room and talked about budgets. Councilman Hale. Her voice carried the particular weight of a journalist who knows she is asking the last question that matters. I want to make sure I understand your position. You are saying that even knowing how close those children came to dying, even seeing the footage of volunteers digging with their bare hands, because your department would not authorize equipment, you would make the same decision again. Hale straightened his tie, the gesture of a man reaching for composure that was no longer available to him. I am saying that procedures exist for a reason. Emotional reactions do not make good policy. Gretchen nodded. Thank you for clarifying. She turned to her cameraman. Did you get that? Every word. The resignation came faster than even the most optimistic observers had predicted. Within 24 hours of the press conference, Hale had lost the support of every sitting member of the city council. Within 48, the mayor had called for his immediate removal. Within 72, Vincent Hale stood at the same podium where he had defended himself and read a prepared statement that convinced no one. I have decided to resign my position, effective immediately. This decision is in the best interest of the city and allows us to move forward from this difficult situation. I maintain that my actions were within the bounds of proper procedure, but I recognize that the perception of those actions has made it impossible for me to continue serving effectively. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no mention of the children whose lives he had weighed against a spreadsheet and found wanting. The crowd that had gathered outside City Hall booed so loudly that his final words were lost in the noise, swallowed by the anger of people who had watched a politician choose numbers over lives and were not willing to let him walk away without hearing what they thought about it. But Hale's downfall was only the beginning. The federal investigation started 3 weeks after the rescue. What began as an inquiry into Hale's specific decisions expanded rapidly into a comprehensive audit of Phoenix's emergency response protocols and infrastructure maintenance records. Investigators from the Department of Justice arrived with subpoenas and laptops and the quiet determination of people who had been trained to find the things that other people had spent years trying to hide. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Maintenance logs for the storm drain system had been falsified for over a decade. Inspections that were supposed to happen quarterly had not occurred in years. The forms had been filled out, the signatures had been forged, the reports had been filed with the appropriate agencies, and none of it was real. It was paperwork designed to create the appearance of safety without the burden of actually providing it. Warning signs at construction sites near the drainage network were routinely removed rather than addressed. When an engineer identified a hazard, the standard practice was not to fix the hazard, but to eliminate the report. Filing cabinets in the Department of Public Works contained hundreds of documents that had been marked for destruction, engineering assessments, and safety evaluations, and risk analyses that told the truth about the infrastructure beneath the city and were buried because the truth was expensive and silence was free. The collapse that had trapped Birdie Thorne had been predicted in an engineering report filed in 2012. The report had been prepared by a structural analyst named Douglas Wendt, a careful man who had spent 3 weeks surveying the tunnel network near 19th and Southern and had produced a 37-page document detailing the specific failures that would occur if the deteriorating concrete was not repaired. He had recommended immediate intervention. His recommendation had been forwarded to the Deputy Director of Public Works, a man named Frank Overby, who had read the first page, checked the cost estimate on the last page, and placed the report in the bottom drawer of his desk, where it remained for 10 years while the concrete continued to crack and shift and slowly surrender to gravity. The collapse happened exactly as Wendt had predicted, in exactly the location he had identified, creating exactly the kind of void space he had warned about. A 4-year-old girl fell through a hole that should not have existed into a chamber that should have been repaired a decade ago and nearly died in the darkness because the man responsible for maintaining the infrastructure had decided that maintaining the paperwork was easier. 7 city officials faced criminal charges. 3 pleaded guilty to negligence resulting in endangerment. 2 went to trial and were convicted. Frank Overby received 18 months in federal prison for destroying evidence related to the cover-up for shredding documents and deleting emails and doing everything in his power to ensure that the truth about the city's crumbling infrastructure never reached the people who lived above it. The civil lawsuits that followed resulted in settlements totaling $14 million. The money went to infrastructure improvements, emergency response upgrades, and a fund for advocacy groups working with homeless youth. Not enough money to fix everything that was broken, not enough to undo the years of neglect, but enough to start. And then there was the law. The Arizona Infrastructure Safety and Emergency Response Act was signed by the governor 4 months after the rescue in a ceremony attended by firefighters and bikers and ordinary citizens who had dug through the earth with their bare hands. The law mandated quarterly inspections of all urban drainage infrastructure. It required immediate public disclosure of any hazards discovered near schools or residential areas. And it created a streamlined process for authorizing emergency excavation when human lives were at risk. No more waiting for paperwork while children drowned. No more choosing procedure over people. No more filing cabinets full of buried warnings. The bill's official name was long and bureaucratic, the kind of name that legislators gave to things so that they sounded important in committee hearings. But nobody used the official name. Everyone called it what it was: Birdie's Law. Cody Wren woke in a hospital bed to the sound of arguing. Not angry arguing, happy arguing. The kind of arguing that happens when too many people are trying to help at the same time and nobody can agree on the best way to do it. The kind that sounds like chaos but feels like warmth, like being surrounded by voices that care about you, even if they cannot agree on the proper temperature for a hospital room or the correct number of pillows a recovering patient requires. He opened his eyes and saw more faces than he could count. Bikers in leather vests, firefighters in uniform, nurses and doctors and police officers, and people he did not recognize at all. People who had no official reason to be in this room, but who had shown up anyway because showing up was what they did now, what they had been doing since 4 in the morning when they grabbed shovels and picks and started digging. "He is awake," someone shouted. The crowd surged forward, then stopped, held back by a nurse who had clearly dealt with this situation before and was not impressed by the number of leather vests in the room. "One at a time," she commanded. "One at a time, or I am removing every single one of you from this ward, and I do not care how many motorcycles are parked outside." The crowd parted, and Harlan Thorne stepped through. He looked different than he had in the tunnel. Clean, dry. His face relaxed in a way that Cody had not seen during the chaos of the rescue. The tight lines around his mouth softened, the hard set of his jaw loosened, but his eyes were the same, focused and intent and looking at Cody like he was the most important person in the world. "How do you feel?" Harlan asked. Cody took stock. His throat was raw, his arms ached, his chest felt like someone had parked a truck on it, which was more or less accurate given the force of the compressions that had brought him back to life. But he was warm. He was dry. The bed beneath him was soft, and the blankets were clean, and somewhere nearby a machine was beeping with a steady rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. "Better," he said. "Is Birdie okay?" Harlan smiled. A real smile, the kind that transforms a face from something hard and closed into something open and alive. "She is perfect. Thanks to you. She has been asking about you every 5 minutes since they brought you both in." He paused. "Actually, there is someone who wants to say hello." He stepped aside and Birdie Thorne came through the crowd of adult legs like they were not even there. She climbed onto the hospital bed without asking permission, without waiting for an invitation, with the absolute certainty of a 4-year-old who has decided where she belongs and will not be persuaded otherwise. She wrapped her arms around Cody's neck and squeezed. "You woke up," she said. "I was so worried. Daddy said you were tired from saving me, but I wanted you to wake up so I could tell you thank you." Cody hugged her back, felt her small heartbeat against his chest. The same heart he had held above the water. The same heart he had refused to let the darkness claim. "You do not have to thank me," he said. "Yes, I do." Birdie pulled back and looked at him with the fierce certainty that only a 4-year-old can produce. "You saved my life. You stayed with me in the dark. You did not let go even when the water came up." She paused. "You are my hero." Something cracked in Cody's chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time. Not the wall he had built between himself and the world, because that wall had already come down somewhere in the tunnels, somewhere between the moment he heard a child crying and the moment the water closed over his head. What cracked now was something deeper. The place where he kept the belief that he did not matter, that he was invisible, that the world had no space for a boy who slept under bridges and ate from dumpsters and had not heard someone say his name with kindness in 2 years. "I am not a hero," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I am just a kid who lives under a bridge. Not anymore." The voice came from the doorway. Cody looked up and saw a woman he did not recognize. Middle-aged, gray-streaked hair pulled back from a face that carried the weight of years, but also something else, something lighter, something that might have been relief. Tired eyes that held a quality he had not seen directed at him in a very long time. Recognition, not the kind you give to strangers, the kind you give to someone you have been waiting to meet for a very long time, even if you did not know you were waiting. Ramona Cross stepped into the room and the crowd parted for her the way they had parted for Harlan. Not because of her size or her authority or the force of her personality, but because something in the way she moved told them that she belonged here, that she had earned the right to be in this room in a way that went beyond protocol or invitation. "I am Ramona," she said. We talked on the phone. Cody felt his breath catch. The voice. He had not seen a face to go with it, had known her only as a presence on the other end of a dying phone line, a voice in the darkness that had promised not to leave him and had kept that promise in ways he was only beginning to understand. "You stayed," he said. "I stayed." Ramona's eyes were wet. She did not try to hide it. "I told you I would." And I did. She sat on the edge of his bed. Her hand found his. The contact was gentle but firm, the touch of someone who knew that this moment mattered more than most moments and was not going to rush through it. "I have been doing this job for 23 years, she said. Thousands of calls, thousands of people in crisis. I have talked to murderers and the victims and everyone in between. And in all that time, I have never cried on the job. Not once," she paused. The room was silent. 200 people standing in a hospital corridor in a cramped room, and not one of them made a sound. "Until you called me. Until you said 3 words that broke something open inside me. Something I had been keeping locked up for longer than you have been alive. I lost my son." Ramona continued. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. 23 years ago, a flash flood, just like the one that almost took you. He was 6 years old. His name was Emmett. He was playing in the backyard while I was at work answering calls in the same building, not 50 feet away. I did not hear him. I did not know the water was coming. I did not save him. She took a breath, the kind of breath that takes effort, that requires the lungs to expand past the weight of what sits on top of them. Every call I have answered since that day, every child in danger, every desperate parent, I have been trying to make up for that, trying to save the boy I could not save. And for 23 years, I have carried that weight alone. I have not talked about it. I have not cried about it. I have not let anyone close enough to see how much it still hurts. She looked at Cody. Her eyes were fierce now, the same fierceness he had heard in her voice on the phone, the fierceness of a woman who had decided to stop hiding. "But then you called, and you said I can hear her." And something in me knew that this was the call I had been waiting for. The chance to finally do what I could not do for Emmett, to hear a child crying in the darkness and actually bring them home. She squeezed his hand. "You saved that little girl, but you also saved me. You gave me something I had given up hoping for, a reason to believe that sometimes the darkness does not win." Cody did not know what to say, did not know how to hold the weight of what Ramona was telling him, how to process the idea that his actions in the tunnel had reached beyond the concrete walls, in the rising water, and the small girl on his shoulders, and had touched someone he had never met, had never seen, had known only as a voice in the dark. So he said the only thing that made sense: "Thank you for not hanging up." Ramona laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and carries everything with it, the grief and the relief and the exhaustion and the joy. "Thank you for calling in the first place. The adoption process should have taken months. The system was designed for deliberation, not speed. Social workers and background checks, and home studies and court dates. A pipeline of bureaucratic steps that existed to protect children from being placed in unsafe environments, but that also managed with remarkable efficiency to keep children who needed families waiting for families who needed them." Harlan Thorne filed the petition 2 weeks after the rescue. The response from the Department of Child Safety was immediate and discouraging. Mr. Thorne had a record: assault 22 years ago, a bar fight in his 20s that had resulted in a misdemeanor conviction and a fine he had paid the next morning. The kind of incident that most people would consider ancient history, a young man's mistake that had been paid for and moved past and forgotten. The foster care system did not forget. His occupation was flagged as concerning. Self-employed mechanic, income variable, professional association with a motorcycle club whose reputation preceded it in ways that were not always flattering. The social worker assigned to the case was a woman named Barbara Henning, who had been doing this work for 19 years and had developed a protective skepticism that bordered on presumption. "Mr. Thorne," she said, sitting across from him in an office that smelled like old coffee and manila folders. I understand the emotional circumstances surrounding your petition, but we have to consider what is best for the child. A stable home environment, consistent income, appropriate role models. Harlan looked at her. He was wearing a clean shirt and his best jeans, and he had removed his rings before coming because his lawyer had told him to present himself as approachable, as mainstream, as the kind of man who fit into the boxes that the system recognized as acceptable. He hated the boxes, but he would climb into every one of them if it meant keeping Cody. "Ma'am," he said, "that boy crawled through 2 miles of darkness to save my daughter. He held her above a flood with his own body. He nearly died keeping a promise he made to a child he had never met. What kind of role model are you looking for exactly?" Barbara Henning made a note in her file. The system required certain assurances. The system required documentation. The system required time. Cody, meanwhile, was terrified, not of the tunnels, not of the water, not of any of the things that had nearly killed him, because those dangers had been immediate and physical, and he had understood them, and his body had known what to do, even when what to do was simply hold on. What terrified him was hope. He had been in the system before. He knew how it worked. A family would express interest, paperwork would be filed, meetings would happen, and then something would go wrong. A background check would reveal a complication, a home study would raise a concern, a social worker would decide that the placement was not in the child's best interest, and the child would be returned to the holding pattern of temporary beds and rotating faces and the slow erosion of the belief that permanence was possible. The Dunning family had taught him that. Gerald and Patricia and their locked refrigerator and their smiles that only appeared when someone official was watching. He had believed them when they said he was welcome. He had unpacked his bag. He had let himself think the word home. Then the bag was packed again and the word was gone, and he learned that hoping for things was the most dangerous thing a person could do. More dangerous than sleeping under bridges, more dangerous than crawling through tunnels. Because when a bridge let you down, you knew it was just concrete and steel. But when a person let you down, the damage went somewhere deeper and stayed there longer and healed slower if it healed at all. Harlan came to visit him every day during the process. Brought Birdie, who had decided with the irrevocable certainty of a 4-year-old that Cody was her brother and would tolerate no discussion to the contrary. Brought food from this diner on Indian School Road that Cody had once scavenged behind the same diner where his mother had worked the late shift, a coincidence that felt like something more than coincidence. But Cody held back, kept a part of himself locked away, protected, ready for the moment when the system would do what the system always did, and he would need that protected part to survive the aftermath. Ramona saw it, Orion. She had spent 23 years listening to voices on the phone, reading the spaces between words, hearing the things that people could not say. She recognized the sound of a child bracing for abandonment because she had heard it 1,000 times on the job. The careful flatness, the measured responses, the way he said, "I am fine," when what he meant was, "I am waiting for this to end." She went to see Barbara Henning. It was not an official visit. Ramona had no formal role in the adoption process, no legal standing, no authority to intervene. What she had was 23 years of service at the Emergency Communications Center, a reputation for competence and integrity that had survived every scandal and budget cut and leadership change the department had endured, and a story that she had never told anyone and was now willing to tell the one person who needed to hear it. She sat in Barbara Henning's office and she talked about Emmett, about the flood, about the 23 years of answering calls and carrying guilt and building walls, about the night a boy named Cody called from beneath the city and everything changed. She talked about what she had done that night, the rules she had broken, the calls she had made, the decision to reach through the system and find the one person who could dig those children out, not because procedure allowed it, but because children were drowning, and procedure was the reason they were still underground. And then she said something that Barbara Henning would later describe as the most compelling argument she had ever heard in 19 years of child welfare work. "I have spent my entire career inside the system. I have followed every rule. I have respected every protocol. And the one time it mattered most, the system failed. It failed those children the same way it failed my son. The same way it is failing Cody right now by making him wait for a family that is already there, already waiting for him, already loving him. That boy does not need more paperwork. He needs a home. Barbara Henning looked at her for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and called the judge. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Harlan brought his lawyer. Ramona brought her testimony. Sledge brought 37 bikers who filled the gallery and sat in silence, their leather vests visible beneath borrowed sport coats, their presence communicating something that no legal argument could match. But the moment that decided it, the moment that made the judge set down her pen and look up from the paperwork and see the situation for what it actually was, came from Birdie. She had been sitting in Harlan's lap, patient and quiet, watching the proceedings with the solemn attention of a child who understood that something important was happening, even if she did not understand the details. When the judge asked if there was anything else to consider before she made her decision, Birdie raised her hand. The courtroom went silent. "Yes, sweetheart," the judge said. "Do you have something you would like to say?" Birdie stood up. She smoothed the front of her dress the way she had seen her father smooth his shirt before important moments. She looked at the judge with an expression of absolute seriousness. "Cody is my brother," she said. "He found me in the dark. He told me stories when I was scared. He held me up when the water came. He promised he would not let go, and he did not let go." She paused. Her lower lip trembled, but she did not cry. "Please do not take him away. He has been alone for a really long time, and he does not have to be alone anymore. We are his family now. We already are." The judge approved the adoption that afternoon. The ceremony took place in the courtyard of the Maricopa County Superior Court on an October morning when the air was cool and the sky was clear, and the light fell through the trees in patterns that shifted with every breeze. 217 bikers attended their motorcycles, filling the parking lot in rows so precise they looked like they had been measured with a ruler. Firefighters came in dress uniforms. Police officers took personal days to attend. Kellaway stood near the back, her arms folded, her face arranged in an expression of tough indifference that fooled absolutely nobody. Ramona sat in the front row. She was crying again. But she was smiling too, and the combination of the two made her face look like something that had been broken and put back together in a new configuration, one that let the light in instead of keeping it out. When the judge asked Cody if he accepted Harlan Thorne as his father and Birdie Thorne as his sister, he said yes, without hesitation, without the careful distance he had been maintaining for weeks, without the armor he had worn since the night his mother ran into a burning building and did not come back. Yes, because for the first time in 5 years, the word family did not feel like something that had been taken away. It felt like something that had been given back. The clubhouse meeting happened 3 days later. The entire chapter assembled in the main hall, 217 members sitting in rows. Harlan stood at the front, his expression formal. "Brothers and sisters, you know why we are here. You know what this boy did. You know the debt we owe him." He turned to face Cody, who stood beside him in a clean shirt and jeans and boots that Sledge had bought for him the day before, boots that fit properly and did not require duct tape to stay together. In this club, we have a saying, family is not blood, family is who shows up, and this boy showed up when no one else did. He crawled through 2 miles of hell to save a little girl he had never met. He held her above the water when the flood came. He did not give up even when giving up would have been easier. He paused. The room was silent. 217 people listening. "So now I am asking you, should Cody Wren be accepted into this family?" The vote was unanimous. Every hand raised, every voice saying yes. Harlan placed a hand on Cody's shoulder and handed him a leather vest cut to fit with patches that marked him as one of them. "Welcome home, brother." The room erupted. And Cody Wren, who had spent 2 years sleeping under bridges and eating from dumpsters and believing that no one in the world would ever care whether he lived or died, finally let himself cry. Not from sadness, not from fear, from something he had forgotten the name of until this moment. Joy. 5 years passed. Cody Wren was 16 years old. He stood on the stage of the Phoenix Convention Center, looking out at 3,000 people who had come to hear him speak. The Birdie Initiative's annual gala, the largest charity event in Arizona. This year's theme was Voices from Underground, celebrating the program he had helped create and the lives it had saved. He cleared his throat and began. 5 years ago, I was sleeping under a bridge. I had been on the streets for 2 years. I had no family, no friends, no reason to believe that anyone cared whether I lived or died. He paused. The room was silent. And then I heard a sound, a little girl crying in the darkness. A 4-year-old named Birdie who had fallen into a place where no one was looking for her. I could have walked away. Most people would have. Most people would have convinced themselves that someone else would handle it. Someone with training, someone with equipment, someone whose job it was to save children from storm drains. But I knew something that most people do not know. I knew that sometimes help does not come. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes the only person who can save you is the one who happens to hear you crying. He touched his chest where the copper token still hung on its cord, the metal warm from his skin. My mother gave me this before she died. She told me she would return. She did not, but her promise did. It returned through every person who showed up that night. Through Ramona, who stayed on the line and broke every rule to get us help. Through my father, who dug with his bare hands. Through 200 strangers who became family. He looked at the audience. 87 dangerous manholes have been covered since that night. 12 children have been found using the protocols we developed. The Birdie Initiative has trained over 500 volunteers to recognize the signs of homeless youth in crisis. But the numbers are not the point. The point is this: every one of us has the power to be the voice that someone hears in the darkness. Every one of us can choose to show up when showing up is hard. Every one of us can decide that the person crying for help is worth saving even when the system says they are not a priority. He paused. My mother ran into a burning building to save strangers. She did not come back. For a long time I was angry about that. I thought she had chosen other people over me. But now I understand. She did return. She returned through me when I climbed into that tunnel. She returned through every person who has ever chosen courage over comfort. She returned through you by being here tonight, by caring about children who have no one else to care about them. He looked at the front row where Ramona sat beside Harlan and Birdie, all three of them crying openly. Birdie was 9 now, long-legged and freckled, and fierce in every way that mattered. So here is my promise to you. I will keep returning. I will keep showing up. I will keep being the voice that someone hears in the darkness. And I hope you will do the same. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Later that night, Ramona Cross drove to Greenwood Memory Lawn Cemetery. She had not been here in years, had avoided this place with its manicured lawns and its rows of identical headstones because coming here meant sitting with the fullness of what she had lost, and for 23 years, she had not been ready for that. She had kept moving instead, kept working, kept answering calls and saving strangers, and building the wall higher and thicker and more impenetrable until she could not see over it anymore and almost forgot that there was something on the other side worth seeing. But something had changed. Not suddenly, not in a single moment of revelation, but slowly over the 5 years since a boy had called her from beneath the city. The wall had been coming down, brick by brick, call by call, one small act of courage at a time. She walked through the rows until she found the small headstone with his name, Emmett Cross, beloved son, forever 6. She knelt in the grass and placed her hand on the cold stone. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "It has been a while." The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of traffic on the freeway, the city going about its business, millions of people living their lives above the tunnels that ran beneath them. I want you to know something. I finally stopped blaming myself. Not because what happened was not horrible. It was. It always will be. But because I realized that carrying that guilt was not honoring you. It was just hurting me. And I do not think that is what you would have wanted. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a copper token identical to the one Cody wore. She had it made after the rescue, a copy of the token that had traveled through the darkness on the chest of a boy who refused to let go. 2 words engraved on its surface. "I'll return. There is a boy named Cody," she said. "You would have liked him. He is brave and kind and stubborn in all the best ways. He saved a little girl from the same thing that took you. And in doing that, he saved me too." She placed the token at the base of the headstone, leaning it against the stone so that the engraved words faced outward, facing the sky. "I hear you now, Emmett. Not your voice exactly, but something, a feeling, a presence. Like you are still with me even though you are not. She smiled. For the first time in 28 years, the smile reached her eyes. I am going to keep doing this work, keep answering calls, keep being there for the children who need someone to listen. Because that is what you would have wanted. That is who you would have been if you had gotten the chance to grow up. She stood, brushed the grass from her knees, looked at the headstone one more time. I love you, baby. I will see you again someday. But not yet. I have too much work to do. She turned and walked away. Behind her, the morning sun climbed higher, and its light found the copper token at the base of the stone. The engraved words caught the light and held it two small words, glowing against the granite like an ember that refused to go out. I'll return, a promise made by a mother who could not keep it. A promise carried through the darkness by a boy who refused to break it. A promise kept by a woman who spent 23 years answering calls and finally heard the one that set her free. A promise that echoed through the tunnels beneath Phoenix, through the lives that had been saved, through the laws that had been written, through the community that had been built on the foundation of one little girl's cry in the darkness. I can hear her. 3 words that changed everything.